Right, there's a single screw here that couples the sprocket shaft to the sprocket itself. We'll remove that. We can push the sprocket shaft out and remove the sprocket. Now I want to unscrew that screw at the top there. I should have left my lock lever in place for that because that'll help lock this in position. While I'm doing that, I'll just soften this lacquer here with some acetone. So it's paint rather than lacquer. Take this shaft round where that thing will drop in. Right about, no, not right about there, right about a bit further round. Excuse me. Right, about there. Put the top on that acetone and put it out of harm's way so I'm not splashing rare and irreplaceable parts with it. Alright, and that loosens the screw. These parts are very sticky with grease. Here's the clutch assembly. This is likewise very, very sticky. We remove our lock lever now. Means at least the top of the body's flat now and I can swap it backwards and forwards to the bench without digging into things or bending anything. The tripod socket. Of course, in a normal working camera, the tripod socket is often got loose screws. Okay, that I didn't expect to see. And hook that spring. Now that's unusual, and I'm just trying to figure out what, yeah, that came from something completely different. That is really half-assed. It means there's not a proper well there to locate the film cassette. The film cassette would normally sit down into this aluminium pocket here on an aluminium insert. This black plastic insert lacks any raised edge, so it means that the film cassette would flop around at the bottom there. That means that that was not a very well manufactured camera. There was no danger that they should have been made with that. We'll look into that a little bit later. That's certainly a major difference, and it's not a difference that was a good thing. Get my lock that little lever out. That lever's job is to lock the rewind button in position when you press it in. These screws, some of these screws are unusually tight. Probably means they were screwed in by someone who didn't normally do that specialised task on an assembly line. These may have been all assembled by repair staff rather than normal assembly line staff. That was unusually stiff inside there. Don't know why that should have been the case. What have we got left in the body? Well, virtually nothing. That back's not a stunning fit here. I notice it's catching here. It was a little bit bent perhaps. Perhaps. There's adhesive sticking out here. Never mind. Okay, so we'll take the door off the front next. 2 screws, one top, one bottom. Usually 1, 2 or 3 washers present to take up the any slack between the door and the frame. Slide that door off. There's no washer at the base and there's no washer at the top. Okay, let's put that back on there and check that again. Check the clearance. Well, there's certainly a bit of clearance there. There should have been a washer or 2 in there. Perhaps they've fallen in. No, and they were never fitted. But it should have had a washer there, or 2. I'll just take that return spring off the shutter release. Well, yeah, some of this I don't know what to make of. It looks, you know, there are things that have been done which are basically not good. Things that have been done make me think it was done by someone who wasn't familiar with the Retina IIIC on a daily basis. So I'll use this tool to remove the retaining ring. That's the shutter running down on the self-timer. Must have just touched the shutter release there. There's our shutter. Looking to see if there's anything that catches my attention, but there's not. Looks like any other shutter at the moment. Here, we can remove the screws from the shroud, from the gear on the front of that transfer shaft. and remove the gear. Take the screw from the top of the arm that couples to the rangefinder and the two screws that hold that component to the front of the inner lens helical. Wriggle that out of the body, which is always a bit of a challenge. How anyone designed that, I'm buggered if I know. This is marked here with an alignment mark so that it'll be put together in the right spot, which is interesting because I've seen nothing to suggest that it's ever been taken apart. Right, I always put my alignment marks at the point where the inner and outer helical are dead level with each other, and I do that by just checking that with the end of my rule to make sure that they are directly opposite each other. And I am going to scar this camera permanently with my own alignment marks. Shock and horror. So 1977 they reckon these were made. That's interesting because I'd certainly heard the tale of Retina IIICs that had or were going to be manufactured from spare parts, and that was when I worked at Kodak in the early to mid 70s, so certainly prior to 77. So it must have been planned at that stage, and whether not sure. It suggested there that they were given to executives, didn't it? The VIPs, they said. This is all very sticky. That grease is dried out. I would say from the look of it that the grease was very generously used. And it was probably not the same stuff that they used on the production line when they were making this model. It's very sticky. Four screws hold the focus mount here to the front standard. Very sticky. Now we're getting down to the last of it now. This shroud assembly is the black part that holds our front standard in position. That's held in with 4 screws. And unusually, they are not ridiculously tight. And one single screw here holds the bracket which holds the transfer shaft in place. This should slide out. There's our transfer shaft and its bracket. There's the body casting. Here's the front standard in the shroud. So we can remove that piece. That's part of the shutter release mechanism. By pressing the two buttons, I can slide this right throughout the back, remove the two buttons and their screws, and now we're down to this piece. There's the return spring, which is trapped on that screw head. Two screws here, smaller one at the bottom, larger one at the top, shoulder screws that guide that piece of the shutter release in place. Alright, well, there's not much to disassemble on the top cover of a Retina IIIC because everything here is all riveted together. Basically, I just normally remove the shoe before I clean the top cover, put the shoe back on, slide the glass out, clean the glass, clean the rear eyepiece and put that all back together. But all I'm really going to concern with at the moment is gathering together all of these mechanical parts that I have got here in a big heap and putting them into the degreaser and into the ultrasonic cleaner and then into the detergent in the ultrasonic cleaner and then rinsing them, drying them and then reassembly. Here you can see the normal bush that would be present to support the bottom of a film cassette in a Retina IIIC camera, or big C camera for that matter. This one just had a plain plastic, flat plastic disc there. And you can see that would support nothing. It's got far too much side play on there, so it means that the cassette would flap about. So there's quite a difference there. Why they chose to do that is just beyond me. It seems a bit of a shortcoming. Even if they had none of these in their spare parts department, it would have been a fairly minor matter for someone with a lathe, in a production lathe, to run some of these up. They're only aluminium, there's nothing particularly complex about them. The holes aren't tapped, they're just through holes. One side's milled off. I mean, if you didn't want to go to the trouble of setting up the mill to do that particular job, you could probably just rub that off on the side of a sander. But instead they've used this plastic piece here. I'm not sure which model that's from. I'll find out. Right, we have a match. Retina Reflex 4. That's what that plastic piece was from. Not from a 3C, nor from any of the others. Well, I've taken a piece here from a Dog Tucker Reflex 4, and so you can see that the part is basically identical. The only difference between these two pieces here is that one has a different number embossed on the base, and that would have been a number that was put on the mould so that they could identify which mould pieces were coming out of. If there was any damaged components, they'd know which die to look for. So there you go. Interesting. The leatherettes on this camera are lifting off. They're going to have to be glued back in place. Ideally, I like to remove them completely in order to glue them back, but I don't want to risk this actually cracking here, so I'll see if I can clean under this edge and just glue it back down at that point. It's just come adrift at that hinge line there. I'm checking the other side, see what I find there. The leatherettes are not particularly well fitted. They're not as neat as a production job. They're, again, that ties in with the idea that it was not a camera that ran down the production line where production staff are familiar with making them and making them every day, manufactured it. I'll check the leatherettes at this end. Yeah, likewise along here, along the catch end, that's loose at the top too. I'm not going to disturb the leatherette apart from that. I'm just going to clean underneath those edges carefully and then glue those edges back down. I'm not going to try and disturb the rest of it. The fit of the leatherette along this front edge here is not good. In fact, it's not even glued down. That's a problem. I don't know how brittle the leatherettes will be. Yeah, they're a little bit brittle looking. Alright. I'll see if I can scoot some adhesive underneath that loose edge there and press it down. I'm not really confident about that. I might just have to leave that as is. Once the shroud is in place on the front and the door folds over that, of course, under normal circumstances you'd hardly notice that. The door will be closing to there. But apart from that, I just need to clean this body up, so I'll do that, which is not very exciting at all because mostly it consists of using a paintbrush to brush away any loose dust and grit, and then cotton buds and naphtha to clean away any dried grease and so forth. I do want to get rid of that line of adhesive that's sticking out there because that's doing nobody any good. That's better. It's almost as though two different adhesives were used here. This is a very rubbery substance. It may be that somebody has had a go at fixing this before, of course. This is a very rubbery sort of adhesive that was squeezed out over the top here. Down at the bottom, this is a much more drier, more brittle adhesive. Perhaps someone has noticed that the leatherettes were lifting on this and has squirted some glue underneath them. That would certainly account for that. Been plenty of years between 1977 and now. Anything could have happened. But these leatherettes, they're not pliable enough for me to be confident about lifting that leatherette without damaging it. I had to get the leatherette off the base and that went quite smoothly anyway. Less so these ones. Anytime you've got a curved surface, leatherettes are a problem because at that point where they roll over an edge, it's quite stiff. They'll move in one direction, but they cannot move in the other direction without tearing. It would require too much stress on the material. So it's always tricky when you get to a point like this. And what's more is where they've been stretched over the body like that, over an edge of the body like that, the adhesive has often got a very, very firm grip because it was stuck exceptionally well because there was plenty of pressure holding it down. Never mind, some quick clean up work.